Look at you, helpless and hopeless. I regret ever meeting you. Look, I found someone better.
Yeah, man, take the papers and sign. You're just too poor for her. She deserves a better life. She deserves a life that matches who she really is. You were never going to give her that. It's over, Marcus. What are you talking about?
We're leaving you.
You lost, poor man.
Goodbye, Marcus. You are never going to be rich in your life, you poor rat.
The divorce papers were still warm from the printer when Marcus Reynolds realized that the woman standing beside another man had already decided he was no longer worth fighting for. His wife, Renee, did not look nervous. She did not look guilty. She looked relieved. The man beside her held out the papers with one hand and adjusted the cuff of his expensive navy suit with the other. "Take them," he said. "Sign them." Marcus stared at the documents. "Why are you giving me my wife's divorce papers?" The man smiled. "Because she asked me to." Renee folded her arms. "Look at you," she said quietly. "Helpless and hopeless. I regret ever meeting you. I found someone better." Marcus looked from her to the stranger. Then he noticed the way Renee stood close to him, not beside him, with him. The stranger stepped forward. "She deserves a life that matches who she really is. You were never going to give her that." Marcus swallowed. Behind them stood a mansion Marcus had only seen in photographs, surrounded by manicured lawns, palm trees, stone pillars, and a driveway wide enough for a dozen luxury cars. He had been invited there because Renee said she wanted to talk about their future. He had not expected his future to be placed in a folder. Renee's lover extended the papers again. "Sign your name and walk away. You're just too poor for her." Marcus's fingers tightened at his sides. He could have shouted. He could have demanded an explanation. Instead, he asked the one question that hurt him most. "Renee, is this really what you want?" She stared at him for several seconds. Then she nodded. "Yes." The answer was almost gentle. That made it worse. Marcus looked at the woman he had loved for 11 years and remembered the first apartment they had shared. The cheap brown couch. The mattress they bought from a neighbor. The tiny kitchen where Renee once danced barefoot while he cooked scrambled eggs. He remembered her laughing so hard that morning that she cried. He remembered promising her that one day he would give her everything she wanted. Apparently, 11 years had been enough time for her to decide that promise was never going to happen. The lovers slipped the papers closer. "Stop making this difficult." Renee sighed. "Marcus, please. Don't embarrass yourself." He looked at her. "Embarrass myself? You know what I mean." "No," Marcus said. "I really don't." She glanced toward the mansion. "Look around you." He did. "You see this?" "Yes. This is the kind of life I want." Marcus gave a small, broken laugh. "So, that's what this is about. It's not just money." Her lover immediately smiled. "Of course it isn't." Renee reached for his arm. Marcus watched her hand settle against the man's sleeve. He understood then. There was no conversation left to have. The man leaned closer to Renee and said, loud enough for Marcus to hear, "Goodbye, Marcus. You're never going to be rich in your life, you poor rat." Renee said nothing. She simply turned. Together, they walked toward the mansion. Marcus remained where he was. He watched them disappear through the front doors. Then something strange happened. A black SUV parked near the entrance suddenly stopped. An older man stepped out. He looked across the driveway. His eyes landed on Marcus. The man's face changed completely. He froze. Then, instead of walking toward the mansion, he turned toward Marcus. Marcus frowned. "Sir?" The old man stared at him as though he had seen a ghost. Then he whispered 4 words. "Your father was right." Marcus's heart skipped. "My father?" The man looked toward the mansion, then back at Marcus. "You really don't know, do you?" Before Marcus could answer, the man's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. His expression became frightened. "Mr. Reynolds," he whispered, "we need to talk." Marcus had no idea why a stranger was looking at him that way. He had no idea what his father had supposedly been right about, and he certainly had no idea that the divorce papers in his hand were about to become the least important document in his life. But before we continue, if you believe a person's value should never be measured by their bank account, take a second to subscribe, and tell me in the comments, would you sign the papers and walk away, or would you demand the truth? Because Marcus was about to discover that the people who had just called him poor had made one enormous mistake. They had never bothered to find out who he really was. 11 years earlier, Marcus had met Renee at a neighborhood bookstore. It was raining that afternoon. Marcus had gone inside to escape the weather after finishing a long shift at work. He was carrying a coffee he could barely afford and searching for a book about starting a small business. Renee reached for the same book. Their hands touched. She laughed. "You can have it." Marcus smiled. "I think you were here first." "I was." "Then why are you giving it to me?" She shrugged. "Maybe I want to see if you're serious about whatever business you're trying to start." That was their first conversation. It lasted nearly an hour. They talked beside a shelf, while rain hammered the windows. Marcus told her he wanted to build something of his own. Renee told him she wanted a beautiful home with a garden, a peaceful kitchen, and enough money that she would never have to worry about bills again. Marcus laughed. "That sounds expensive." "It is. Then I better work hard." She smiled. "That's why I like you." Those words stayed with him. For years, Marcus believed that was the woman he had married. They built their life slowly. There were no luxury vacations, no designer clothes, no private drivers, but there was affection. There were Sunday breakfasts, late-night conversations, inside jokes, birthday cakes bought from the grocery store. When Marcus lost his job once, Renee sat beside him on their bedroom floor and told him they would survive together. When her mother became ill, Marcus drove her to appointments and waited outside every hospital room. When Renee got promoted, Marcus surprised her with flowers, even though he had to borrow money to buy them. She cried when she saw them. "You always make me feel loved," she whispered. Marcus kissed her forehead. "I always will." For a while, he did. Then the world around Renee began changing. It started with harmless things. She began following luxury lifestyle accounts. Then came invitations to expensive dinners. Then coworkers who talked about penthouses, investments, private schools, and international vacations. Renee started comparing their lives to everyone else's. At first, she hid it. Then she stopped. One night, Marcus came home and found her sitting on the couch, scrolling through photographs. She did not look up. "Do you ever wonder what our life could have been? Do you ever wonder what our life could have been?" Marcus stopped taking off his jacket. "What do you mean?" Renee finally looked up. She turned the phone toward him. On the screen was a photograph of a couple standing beside a white sports car outside a glass mansion. "They're younger than us," she said. "They have everything." Marcus studied the photograph. "Good for them." Renee's expression tightened. "That's all you have to say? What do you want me to say?" "I want you to understand that I don't want to struggle forever." Marcus sat beside her. "We're not struggling forever." "How do you know?" "Because I'm still working." She laughed softly. "That's your answer to everything. What should it be?" "Maybe you should think bigger." Marcus looked at her. "I am thinking bigger." "No, Marcus, you're thinking smaller." That sentence stayed with him. At the time, he thought it was simply frustration. He didn't know it was the beginning of the end. Months passed. Renee became distant. She started coming home later. She bought expensive clothes Marcus knew they could not afford. When he asked about them, she said they were gifts. Then she started talking about a man named Adrian. "He's just someone from work," she said. Marcus believed her. He wanted to. Adrian Cole was everything Marcus was not. He wore tailored suits. He drove luxury cars. He traveled constantly. He spoke about investments as casually as other people spoke about groceries. But Marcus never considered him a threat. That was his mistake. One evening, Renee came home smiling. Marcus hadn't seen that smile in weeks. "What's got you so happy?" "Nothing." Something happened. She sat beside him. "Adrian invited me to a charity gala." Marcus smiled. "That sounds nice. You don't mind?" "Why would I?" She hesitated. "Because it's expensive." Marcus reached for her hand. "Go enjoy yourself." She looked at him. For a moment, something like guilt crossed her face. Then it disappeared. "Thank you." That was the last time Marcus willingly gave her permission to step into another man's world. After that gala, everything changed. Renee began criticizing Marcus's clothes, his car, his job, his apartment, even the way he spoke. One morning, she looked at him while he was tying his shoes. "You're capable of more." Marcus smiled. "I know." "No, I mean financially." He looked up. "I understand. You don't. What am I missing?" She stood. "You don't have ambition." Marcus stared at her. He had worked since he was 19. He had never missed rent, never abandoned her, never refused to help her family. Yet somehow, she had reduced all of that to a lack of ambition. Still, Marcus stayed. Because he remembered the bookstore. He remembered the rainy afternoon. He remembered the woman who once told him she liked him because he worked hard. He believed that woman was still somewhere inside her. He was wrong. The final blow came 3 weeks before the divorce papers. Marcus came home early. The apartment was quiet. Renee wasn't supposed to be home. Then he heard laughter from the bedroom. A man's voice. Marcus stopped walking. He didn't open the door. He didn't need to. He recognized Adrian. When the door finally opened, Renee's face told him everything. Marcus didn't yell. He didn't fight. He simply asked, "How long?" Renee looked down. Adrian stepped behind her. "Long enough." Marcus looked at him. "You're the reason she's leaving me?" Adrian smiled. "No, I'm simply giving her the courage to leave a life she already outgrew." Marcus looked at Renee. "Is that true?" She nodded. "I've been unhappy for a long time." He felt something inside him break. But even then, Marcus asked the question that revealed how much he still loved her. "Is there anything I can do?" Renee shook her head. "No." 3 weeks later, Marcus stood outside the mansion with divorce papers in his hand. Now he understood why. But what he didn't understand was the old man's warning. He followed the stranger to the SUV. The man's name was Charles Whitmore. He had served Marcus's father for nearly 30 years. Marcus barely remembered seeing him as a child. "My father," Marcus said slowly. "What did he have to do with this?" Charles looked at him. "Everything." Marcus frowned. "My father died when I was 12. "I know. So why are you talking like he left something for me?" Charles reached into the SUV and removed a worn leather briefcase. He placed it on the hood. "This has been waiting for you." Marcus stared at it. "What is it?" "Your inheritance." Marcus almost laughed. "My father didn't leave me an inheritance." Charles looked directly into his eyes. "He left you an empire." Marcus said nothing. Charles opened the briefcase. Inside were several documents. The first page contained a name Marcus recognized. Reynolds Global Holdings. His breathing changed. "That can't be." Charles turned another page, then another. Marcus saw company names, banks, real estate firms, energy companies, technology investments, international properties. His eyes moved faster. "What am I looking at?" "The Reynolds dynasty." Marcus looked up. Charles's voice lowered. "Your family controls assets, valued at approximately $45 billion. Marcus stepped backward. For several seconds he couldn't speak. Then he shook his head. "No." Charles remained silent. "My father worked in real estate. He owned real estate." "That isn't the same thing." Charles almost smiled. "You were 12 when your father died. Your mother was terrified that the wealth would consume you. Marcus stared at him. She told me we had nothing. She told you that because she wanted you to grow up without becoming dependent on money. Marcus looked back at the documents. Then why didn't anyone tell me? Charles's expression changed. Because your father left one final instruction. What instruction? Charles reached into the briefcase again. This time, he pulled out a sealed envelope. Marcus recognized the handwriting immediately. His father's handwriting. On the front were 5 words. For Marcus, when he is ready. Marcus's hands began to tremble. Charles stepped back. I've waited 29 years to give you that letter. Marcus looked toward the mansion where Renee and Adrian had disappeared. Then he looked down at his father's sealed envelope. For the first time that night, he wasn't thinking about the divorce. He wasn't thinking about Renee. He wasn't thinking about Adrian. He was thinking about the possibility that his entire life had been built on a secret. Marcus slowly broke the seal. He unfolded the letter. The first sentence made his heart stop. My son, if you are reading this, then someone has finally tried to take from you what you never knew belonged to you. Marcus read the sentence again. Then Charles whispered, There's something else you need to know. Marcus looked up. What? Charles pointed toward the mansion. That house isn't Adrian's. Marcus stared at him. Charles continued. It belongs to your family. Marcus's face went completely still. And suddenly, the divorce papers in his hand meant something very different. Because the woman who had just told him he was too poor to give her a better life had walked away from a man who had unknowingly been standing on the edge of a $45 billion dynasty. But Marcus still hadn't discovered the most dangerous part. Adrian hadn't chosen Renee by accident, and someone inside the Reynolds empire had been waiting years for Marcus to come home. Marcus read his father's letter beneath the soft yellow light of the SUV's interior. He expected an explanation. Instead, the first page raised more questions than it answered. His father's handwriting continued. Marcus, there will come a day when someone tries to convince you that your worth is determined by what you own. Do not believe them. Money can purchase comfort, but it cannot purchase character. That is why I kept this world away from you. Marcus stopped reading. His eyes filled with tears. His father had been gone for nearly 3 decades. Yet somehow, every word felt like it had been written that morning. Charles sat quietly across from him. Why did my mother never tell me? Because she made a promise. To my father? Yes. Marcus looked down at the letter. What promise? That you would become a man before becoming an heir. Marcus closed his eyes. He remembered his childhood. His mother had never allowed him to believe they were wealthy. They lived in an ordinary neighborhood. He attended a normal school. He wore hand-me-down clothes. When other children talked about their father's companies, Marcus thought his own father had simply been a successful businessman who died too young. His mother never corrected him. She wanted him to learn the value of work. Now he understood why. But one question remained. If my family owns all this, why am I struggling? Charles gave him a tired smile. Because your father designed it that way. What does that mean? Your father created a succession structure. You could not access controlling assets until certain conditions were met. Marcus stared at him. What conditions? Independence. No criminal record. No financial manipulation. No attempt to claim the inheritance prematurely. Marcus laughed bitterly. So my father made me prove I could survive without the money? Yes. And nobody thought I deserved to know? Your mother believed you were safer not knowing. Marcus looked toward the mansion. The lights inside glowed warmly through enormous windows. Renee was somewhere in there. Adrian was somewhere in there. They had spent years believing Marcus was poor. Now he knew the truth. But he didn't feel rich. He felt betrayed. Charles reached into the briefcase. There is more. He placed a second folder beside the letter. Marcus opened it. Inside was a photograph. A younger version of his father stood in front of a towering glass building. Beside him were several men in suits. Marcus recognized one immediately. Adrian. Marcus's stomach tightened. No, Charles nodded. That's Adrian's father. Marcus looked at the photograph again. How? Your father's biggest rival was the Cole family. Marcus's expression hardened. And Adrian is his son. Yes. The pieces began moving into place. Adrian hadn't simply appeared in Renee's life. He came from a family that had competed with Marcus's family for decades. Charles lowered his voice. Your father spent years protecting the Reynolds holdings from the Coles. Marcus stared at him. Does Adrian know who I am? Charles hesitated. That is what we need to find out. Marcus stood. Then why did he give me divorce papers? Because he believes you have nothing. Marcus looked at the documents. For the first time, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. The divorce agreement contained an unusual clause. He pointed to it. What is this? Charles took the papers. His face changed. This shouldn't be here. What? This isn't a standard divorce agreement. Marcus stepped closer. Charles read the paragraph twice. Then he looked at Marcus. Your wife is attempting to claim financial rights connected to assets she has no legal knowledge of. Marcus felt cold. Meaning? Meaning someone prepared these papers for a reason. Charles pulled out his phone. I need to make a call. Marcus stopped him. Wait. He looked at the mansion. Does Renee know? Charles shook his head. I don't think she knows the full truth. What about Adrian? I don't know. Marcus looked down. For 11 years, he had believed his wife wanted a better life. Now he wondered whether someone had been quietly encouraging her dissatisfaction. That night, Marcus didn't go home. He checked into a modest hotel. He sat on the edge of the bed for hours. His phone kept vibrating. Renee. Then again. Renee. He didn't answer. A message arrived. Please sign the papers. Let's end this peacefully. Marcus stared at it. Then another message appeared. Adrian says you're making this harder than it needs to be. Marcus laughed quietly. The same man who had just insulted him was now telling his wife that Marcus was causing problems. He put the phone down. For the first time in 11 years, Marcus stopped trying to save his marriage. The next morning, Charles arrived with 2 attorneys. They entered the hotel suite, carrying several boxes. One of the attorneys introduced herself as Eleanor Grant. She was a black woman in her late 50s with silver hair and the calm confidence of someone who had spent decades dealing with powerful people. Mr. Reynolds, she said. Marcus looked at her. Please call me Marcus. She nodded. Marcus, your father appointed me as one of the trustees of the Reynolds Family Foundation. Marcus frowned. I've never heard of it. I know. She placed a document in front of him. This foundation owns interests in several companies. How many? 43 major entities. Marcus stared at the page. Eleanor continued. Some are completely controlled by the family. Others have minority positions. She turned another page. Your family has interests in logistics, renewable energy, commercial real estate, private equity, telecommunications, medical technology, hospitality, and financial services. Marcus rubbed his forehead. And the total? Current estimated family valuation is approximately $45 billion. Silence filled the room. Marcus looked at Charles. Then Eleanor. Why me? Because you're the surviving designated heir. He shook his head. I don't want to be some billionaire heir. Eleanor's expression softened. You already are. Marcus looked away. The words didn't feel exciting. They felt heavy. Then Eleanor said something that changed everything. There's another issue. Marcus looked back. What? Your father suspected someone inside the organization might attempt to control the succession. Who? We don't know. Eleanor opened another file. Your father's final memorandum specifically warned us that the next heir could be manipulated through marriage. Marcus went still. Marriage. Renee. Adrian. The room suddenly felt smaller. Marcus stared at the document. Are you saying my father predicted this? Not specifically your wife. She paused. But he predicted someone might attempt to gain access through the person closest to you. Marcus stood. I need to know everything. Eleanor nodded. That is why we're here. For the next several hours, Marcus learned about the world his father had hidden from him. He learned about companies carrying the Reynolds name. He learned that the family owned commercial towers in several American cities. He learned about a renewable energy division expanding across multiple countries. He learned that the family had quietly invested in technology companies before they became household names. He learned that his father had built a private investment structure designed to protect the family's wealth for generations. And then he learned something that made him furious. His mother had never been lying when she said they were living simply. She had deliberately kept the money away. Marcus understood why. But understanding didn't erase the years he had spent believing he was inadequate. He remembered every time Renee had called him unsuccessful. Every time she compared him to Adrian. Every time she looked disappointed when he arrived in an old car. Every time he had apologized for not being enough. He clenched his fists. Eleanor noticed. Marcus? He looked up. I spent 11 years thinking I wasn't good enough for her. You were never required to be wealthy to be worthy. He nodded slowly. Then his phone rang. Renee. This time, Marcus answered. Hello? Her voice was cold. Have you signed the papers? No. A pause. Why? Because I want to read them first. You've had enough time. Marcus looked at Eleanor. She was watching him carefully. Renee, he said, who prepared the divorce agreement? Silence. What are you talking about? Who prepared it? Adrian helped me. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Why? Because he knows what he's doing. Marcus almost laughed. I see. Marcus, don't make this ugly. You already did. She sighed. I don't understand why you're suddenly acting different. Marcus looked down at his father's letter. For a moment, he wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to say, you have no idea who you just left. But he stopped himself. Instead, he said quietly, I'm not acting different, Renee. He paused. I'm finally seeing things clearly. He ended the call. Eleanor smiled faintly. That was wise. Marcus looked at her. I don't want revenge. You may not need it. What does that mean? Eleanor opened her laptop. I ran a preliminary review of Adrian Cole's recent business activities. She turned the screen toward him. Marcus stared. There were transactions, company acquisitions, investment transfers, several names he didn't recognize. Then he saw one name that made his blood run cold. Reynolds Meridian Holdings. Marcus looked up. What's that? Eleanor's face became serious. One of our family's most protected subsidiaries. Why is Adrian's company listed here? It shouldn't be. Charles stepped closer. Eleanor continued. Someone has been trying to purchase controlling interests through a chain of shell companies. Marcus stared at the screen. Who? Eleanor zoomed in. A name appeared. Cole Strategic Partners. Marcus felt his chest tighten. Adrian wasn't simply dating his wife. He was attempting to enter Marcus's family's business empire. And suddenly, the divorce papers looked less like the end of Marcus's marriage and more like the opening move in a much larger game. Then Eleanor received an urgent message. She read it. Her expression changed. Marcus? What? Adrian just scheduled a meeting with the board. Marcus stood. When? Tomorrow morning. Why? Eleanor looked directly into his eyes. Because he believes you have no idea you're the rightful heir. Marcus slowly picked up his father's letter. For the first time, he understood the warning written on the final page. Never underestimate the person who thinks you have nothing to lose. Marcus looked toward the window. Tomorrow, he would walk into the world his father had hidden from him. And for the first time in his life, everyone inside that boardroom would have to stand when Marcus Reynolds entered. The next morning, Marcus stood outside the boardroom doors, wearing the same charcoal suit he had owned for years. Nothing about him looked different, but everything about the world around him had changed. Two security officers stood nearby. An executive assistant held the door open. Inside, nearly 20 people sat around a polished table beneath a wall of glass overlooking the city. At the center sat Adrian Cole. He looked completely comfortable. He was speaking to several board members when the doors opened. Then Marcus walked in. The room fell silent. Adrian turned. For a second, confusion crossed his face. Then he smiled. Marcus. Marcus said nothing. He walked toward the empty chair at the head of the table. Adrian laughed softly. I'm sorry, this meeting is for shareholders and authorized executives. Marcus pulled out the chair. I know. Adrian glanced at the security officers. Can someone explain to him that he isn't supposed to be here? Nobody moved. Then Eleanor Grant entered behind Marcus. Actually, she said, he is exactly where he is supposed to be. Adrian's smile disappeared. Eleanor placed a folder on the table. Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce Marcus Reynolds. One of the older directors immediately stood. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, everyone in the room was standing. Adrian remained seated. His face had lost its color. Marcus looked around the room. For the first time, he understood what his father had built. Not just money, a machine of influence, a network that stretched across industries and countries, a legacy that had been protected for decades. And somehow, it belonged to him. Adrian finally stood. This is ridiculous. Eleanor looked at him. No. What's ridiculous is that you attempted to negotiate control of a Reynolds subsidiary without informing its designated controlling heir. Adrian stared at Marcus. You? Marcus nodded. Yes. Adrian laughed nervously. You don't even know how this company works. That may be true. Marcus paused. But I'm learning. One of the directors cleared his throat. Mr. Cole, your presentation is no longer necessary. Adrian's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. Marcus looked at him. No, someone else made the mistake. Adrian's eyes narrowed. Who? Marcus didn't answer, because there was something he needed to understand first. He turned toward Eleanor. I want to know how Adrian got access to our subsidiary. Eleanor opened the folder. We traced the transaction chain, and she hesitated. Someone inside Reynolds Meridian provided confidential information. Marcus's expression hardened. Who? We haven't identified the person yet. Adrian suddenly spoke. This is absurd. I was invited to negotiate a legitimate acquisition. Marcus looked at him. By whom? Adrian didn't answer. That silence told Marcus enough. Someone inside the company had opened the door for him. Someone had known about the succession structure. Someone had probably known Marcus was unaware of his inheritance. Marcus sat down. Then let's find that person. The boardroom doors closed. For the next 2 hours, Marcus listened. He learned about missing documents, unusual transfers, anonymous communications, a former executive who had resigned 6 months earlier, and a series of meetings between Adrian's company and someone using a private email address. Then Eleanor placed a photograph on the table. Marcus stared at it. It showed Adrian entering a restaurant. Across from him sat a man Marcus recognized. His uncle, Robert Reynolds. Marcus leaned back. That's my father's brother. Eleanor nodded. Robert was the only family member who opposed your father's succession plan. Marcus felt a chill. Where is he now? No one knows. Marcus looked at the photograph again. Then another thought struck him. My mother. Eleanor looked at him. What about her? Did she know about Robert? Charles answered. She suspected he wanted control. Marcus stood. I need to see her. That afternoon, Marcus drove to the modest house where his mother had lived since his father's death. She opened the door. The moment she saw Charles standing behind him, she knew. Her eyes filled with tears. You finally found out. Marcus stopped. You knew. She lowered her head. I knew you would eventually. He stepped inside. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then Marcus placed the letter on the table. Why did you let me believe we had nothing? His mother sat down. Because your father wanted you to have something money could never buy. What? A normal life. Marcus looked away. You could have told me. And then what? She looked directly at him. You would have grown up surrounded by people who wanted something from you. Marcus was silent. Your father had enemies, she continued. People who smiled at him while planning how to take what he built. She wiped a tear. I wanted you to grow up knowing who loved you before you ever knew what your family owned. Marcus's anger softened. But one question remained. Did you know about Renee? His mother's face changed. No. Did you know Adrian was connected to the Cole family? Yes. Marcus froze. You knew? I knew his surname. Why didn't you warn me? Because I didn't want to interfere with your marriage. Marcus sat across from her. Maybe you should have. She looked down. I was wrong. It was the first time Marcus had ever heard his mother say those words. He reached across the table. I don't blame you. She looked at him. I blame myself. Why? Because I taught you to believe being humble meant accepting whatever people gave you. Marcus frowned. She continued. Humility is knowing your worth without needing to prove it. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. Then his mother reached into a drawer. She removed an old envelope. I kept this because your father told me never to destroy it. Marcus opened it. Inside was a photograph of his father with Robert. On the back were handwritten words, Robert knows where the original trust is hidden. Marcus looked up. Where is Uncle Robert? His mother shook her head. I don't know. His phone rang. Eleanor, Marcus answered. Marcus, we found something. What? Robert Reynolds isn't missing. Marcus stood. Where is he? Eleanor's voice lowered. He's been living under another name. Where? In the same city. Marcus's heartbeat accelerated. Why? We don't know yet. A pause. There's more. What? His last recorded business meeting was with Adrian Cole. Marcus closed his eyes. Everything connected. Renee, Adrian, Robert, the hidden trust. Marcus opened his eyes. What did they meet about? Eleanor was silent. Then she answered, Your inheritance. Froze. Your inheritance. Marcus didn't answer. For several seconds, he simply stared through the window of his mother's house. The city outside continued moving as if nothing had changed. Cars passed. People walked along the sidewalk. A delivery truck stopped across the street. But Marcus felt as though the entire world had shifted beneath his feet. Adrian had not simply taken his wife. He had been moving toward Marcus's family. And someone had helped him. Where is Robert? Marcus finally asked. Eleanor gave him an address. Marcus looked at his mother. She immediately understood. You're going after him. I need answers. His mother reached for his hand. Marcus, be careful. He nodded. I will. That evening, Marcus and Charles drove to a quiet neighborhood on the edge of the city. The house looked ordinary. Too ordinary. No security. No luxury vehicles. No sign that someone connected to a $45 billion dynasty lived there. Charles knocked. Nothing. He knocked again. The door opened. An older black man stood there. His hair was gray. His face was thinner than Marcus remembered. But Marcus knew him immediately. Uncle Robert. Robert stared at him. For a moment, neither man moved. Then Robert whispered, Your father always said you had his eyes. Marcus stepped inside. Why did you disappear? Robert closed the door. Because I was afraid. Of what? Of myself. Marcus frowned. Robert walked toward the kitchen. Your father believed the family should remain under one person's control. I believed it should be divided. You wanted the company. Robert looked back. I wanted power. The honesty surprised Marcus. And Adrian? Robert sighed. I thought his family could help me get it. Marcus's jaw tightened. So you gave him information. I gave him information about the company. You gave him information about me. Robert lowered his head. I didn't know he was involved with your wife. Marcus froze. You knew about Renee? I knew Adrian had become close to her. Then why didn't you warn me? Robert looked ashamed. Because by then, I had already gone too far. Marcus stared at him. How far? Robert walked to a cabinet and removed a small metal box. He placed it on the table. This contains the original trust documents. Marcus looked at it. The trust? Robert nodded. Your father created it because he knew I might eventually challenge him. Marcus opened the box. Inside were legal documents bearing his father's signature. He read slowly. Then his eyes widened. There is a condition. Yes. What condition? Robert sat down. Your controlling inheritance only becomes fully activated when you reject an attempt to obtain it through manipulation. Marcus looked up. What does that mean? Your father wanted to know whether you would choose power for yourself or protect the family because it was right. Marcus read the document again. Then he understood. The divorce. The attempted acquisition. Adrian's involvement. The pressure. Everything had unknowingly pushed Marcus toward the exact test his father had designed decades earlier. Robert continued. Your father believed the greatest threat to an heir wasn't losing money. What was it? Becoming the kind of man who believed money made him better than everyone else. Marcus looked at the documents. For the first time, the inheritance didn't feel like a prize. It felt like a responsibility. Then Robert said something else. There's one thing you don't know. Marcus looked at him. Adrian wasn't the one who started this. Marcus's expression hardened. Who was? Robert hesitated. Someone close to Renee. Marcus's mind raced. Who? Robert shook his head. I don't know the name. Then what do you know? Someone approached her months before Adrian did. Why? To convince her that you were financially unstable. Marcus went silent. Robert continued. They fed her information. They showed her lifestyles. They made her believe she was wasting her life with you. Marcus remembered every conversation, every comparison, every insult, every time Renee had told him he wasn't ambitious enough. It suddenly made sense. Someone had been feeding the insecurity that already existed inside her. But that didn't excuse her choices. She had still chosen to believe them. She had still chosen Adrian. She had still stood beside him while he called Marcus a poor rat. Marcus closed the box. I need to see Adrian. Robert nodded. He'll be at the Reynolds Gala tomorrow night. Marcus looked surprised. Why? Because he believes he's about to secure a major partnership with the board. Marcus almost smiled. He won't. The following evening, the Reynolds Gala filled one of the city's most magnificent ballrooms. Hundreds of executives, investors, celebrities, and political leaders moved beneath enormous chandeliers. Renee arrived beside Adrian. She wore an elegant orange gown. Adrian wore a black tuxedo. He leaned toward her. Tonight changes everything. Renee smiled. You're sure? Absolutely. She looked around the room. Marcus isn't here, is he? Adrian laughed. Why would he be? At that exact moment, the ballroom doors opened. Marcus walked in. He wasn't wearing anything extravagant, just a perfectly fitted black suit. The room gradually fell silent. One executive noticed him. Then another. People began turning. Whispers moved through the ballroom. Renee's smile disappeared. Adrian stopped breathing. Marcus walked forward. No security guards. No dramatic announcement. He didn't need one. Eleanor followed behind him. Then Charles, the chairman of the board, stepped forward. Mr. Reynolds. He extended his hand. Marcus shook it. Good evening. The chairman turned toward the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce the controlling heir of the Reynolds dynasty? The room erupted in whispers. Renee's face went pale. Adrian stared at Marcus as if he were seeing a completely different person. Marcus looked directly at his wife. She whispered, "You knew?" Marcus shook his head. "No." "Then, I didn't know." Her eyes filled with tears. Marcus continued, "But you did." Renee couldn't answer. Adrian stepped forward. "This is a setup." Marcus looked at him. "No." He handed Eleanor a folder. "That's your acquisition proposal." Adrian looked at it. Eleanor spoke calmly. "Rejected." Adrian's face tightened. "You can't do this." Marcus looked at him. "Actually, I can. You don't understand the deal." "I understand enough." Adrian lowered his voice. "You think money makes you better than me?" Marcus shook his head. "No." He stepped closer. "That was your mistake." Adrian stared at him. Marcus continued. "You thought money made me worthless." Silence spread across the room. Renee began crying. "Marcus, please." He looked at her. "You said you wanted a life that matched who you really were." She nodded through tears. "I was wrong." Marcus's expression remained calm. "You weren't wrong about wanting more." He paused. "You were wrong about what more meant." Renee covered her mouth. Marcus looked at Adrian. "And you were wrong about me." Adrian's confidence finally disappeared. Marcus handed the divorce papers back to Renee. "I'll sign them." She stared at him. "What?" "I won't fight you." Her tears fell. "Why?" "Because I don't want someone to stay with me because they're afraid of losing my money." Renee lowered her head. Marcus turned away. But before he left, he stopped. "There was a time when I would have done anything to keep you." He looked back at her. "Now I understand that love should never require you to beg someone to recognize your value." Renee couldn't speak. Marcus walked away. Outside the ballroom, Charles caught up with him. "You handled that well." Marcus looked toward the city lights. "I thought becoming rich would feel different." Charles smiled. "You're not rich because of tonight." Marcus looked at him. "Then what am I?" Charles answered, "You're finally free." Marcus stood silently. For years, he had believed the worst thing that could happen to a man was losing the woman he loved. Now he understood. Sometimes losing someone who only valued what you could provide was the beginning of finding yourself. His father had left him $45 billion. But the greatest inheritance wasn't the companies. It wasn't the properties. It wasn't the investments. It wasn't the power. It was the lesson his father had written decades earlier. Know your worth before the world tells you what it is. Marcus looked at the sunrise beginning beyond the skyline. His phone vibrated. A message from his mother appeared. "Your father would be proud of you." Marcus smiled. Then he deleted the divorce notification from his phone. Not because he was bitter, because he was ready to move forward. Behind him was the life he had spent 11 years trying to save. Ahead of him was a future he had never known existed. And somewhere inside that future were companies worth billions, responsibilities he had never imagined, and a family legacy waiting for him to decide what kind of man he would become. Marcus took one final look at the city. Then he walked forward. Not as a poor husband, not as a rejected man, not as the man Renee had called helpless, but as Marcus Reynolds, the heir who never knew he was an heir. The man who discovered that losing everything could sometimes be the first step toward discovering that you had never truly lost yourself. And if there was one lesson Marcus carried with him from that day forward, it was this: never judge someone's future by what you see in their present. Because sometimes the person you call worthless is simply standing at the beginning of a life you cannot yet see. And sometimes the person you walk away from is the person you will spend the rest of your life wishing you had never underestimated.